Uh, yeah, so maybe we should get started. Good afternoon, everyone. For friends who are in the room but also online, thank you all very much for coming to this talk. My name is Andy Won. I'm currently the convener of the Culture Study cluster here in the Institute of European American Studies in Academia Sinica. I'm also the chair of Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Society. So I'm very proud and excited that to announce that this is actually an event that is co-sponsored by both institutions. And that's why we keep the event in a hybrid format. Hopefully that the event will reach out to a wider audience than merely the friends in the room, but also or in Taipei. So thank you all very much for being here in the room. I know some friends are slowly trickling in. So let me allow me to quickly sort of give a short introduction to how this comes about, how this event comes about, and an introduction to our speaker today. The Institute of European American Studies has a cultural studies cluster, which has been here for more than 20 years. In the past, we've been working a lot on Asian American related issues, and in the last decade also, we've been broadening to other fields. Increasingly, in the recent years, our collaboration with Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Society. Can friends online hear me well? Yeah, but friends online, can you hear me well? Just in case. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's wonderful that you're here. And that's why I think this collaboration is one of the little steps we're trying to do to both, bring people from outside into the conversation about what it means to be in Asia, to think about Euro-American presences in relation to the much larger but also deeper histories that is part of our region in different formations, in this case, archipelagic connections as well as militarized histories. So today we are actually going to feature a new book recently published by Bloomsbury Press. It's called The Translocal Island of Okinawa. For friends, you can refer to the poster, but or here if you can see this clearly. It's written by my gentleman next to me, Shinnosuke Takahashi, who is currently a lecturer in the Victoria University of Wellington. It's a little bit confusing in terms of University of Victoria in Canada and here in Wellington.
Victoria University around the world, apparently.
I see. Apparently, that's the case. Shin is actually a very important new voice, but also an ally since he was much younger. It turns out that we actually met each other in 2012, about 12 years ago, when we both served as translators at an event in Shanghai. So it's great to see Shin coming out of age, finishing his PhD, and now has a book, and soon will be promoted into a senior lecturer position in the next year or two. The book, as you know, is about Okinawa, and particularly about the kind of translocal history of Okinawa, particularly when we think about the activism that's been involved. So a careful look into the book, you will see different chapters on the history of Okinawa, as well as the activist groups that have come together for the cause. So it's a very rich and detailed study of this recent modern history that is so important to the region, but very little understood and studied outside of Okinawa itself. And therefore, I think it's a great opportunity that we have Shin here to share with us, his new book. In addition, we also brought Professor Chio Wakabayashi from Okinawa University, very near to us, only about 40 minutes on a flight. So we're grateful that Chio is able to join us as a respondent for Shin's book. In addition, I should also say that Chio has been a very important ally and comrade for the Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Society. She was supposedly going to hold the summer school in 2020, but because of COVID, we were not able to do that. And therefore, it's really wonderful to have Chiu in the room and be part of this conversation. Last but not least is a young fellow, a postdoc fellow here in Academia Sinica in the Institute of History and Philology, Hao Min, who is a recent PhD from Meiji University, if I remember that right. He's been working in Taiwan for about 1 year, 2 years, but also 3 years. Anyway, you don't need to count the years, but he's been very active as a translator, but also as a interlocutor for Pacific history-related events, but also the sort of activism of the 60s in Japan. So we're very happy and and grateful that Hao Min is able to join us. The first two speakers will be speaking in English primarily. Hao Min will be speaking in Chinese, and I'll be the translator for him. So we'll make sure we cover all the major languages here. So without further ado, may I have Shin to present his book? And once again, thank you all for being here as part of the conversation. So.
Okay. People attending online, can you hear me? I think should be all right. Yeah. All right. So yeah, thanks everyone here as well as online coming to join us today this afternoon. My name is, as Andy kindly introduced just now, Shin Takahashi or Shinnosuke Takahashi, either is fine. And I am currently teaching at a, originally I was employed as a lecturer in the Japanese studies, but like due to restructuring we experienced last year, Japanese studies no longer exist as a major, so therefore converted sort of to Asian studies, and which is great. So yeah, so today I'm here to talk about primarily about my book here, just a broad Translocal Island of Okinawa based Activism and Grassroots Regionalism. I only have a copy at the moment with me, but if you're interested in, I can send you a promo code. So, but still, nonetheless, it's quite expensive. So probably better ask the library to purchase it first. Can you please second? Thank you. So yeah, just like to start this talk with my gratitude to Professor Andy Wan for his kind introduction as well as a warm hospitality he's been providing to date. Also want to thank the members of Academia Sinica who were involved in organizing this event, and it is my great honor to be at Academia Sinica, the institute I see as one of the powerhouses for the creation and dissemination of a critical Asian humanities. I'm extremely delighted to see you all, and I hope today's conversation will be remembered in the future as one of the many more dialogues with you. Aside from my talk about the book, one of the main purposes for me to to be here today is this time is to again to say actually thank you for encouragement I received from my Taiwanese friends, whether it be directly or indirectly for the past 10 years or more. As I wrote in acknowledgement of my book, it would have been impossible for me to write, to complete this book without the support and a friendship from various individuals, such as Andy and Professor Cheng Wan-shin, and the collectives, namely the Inter-Asia Society, Inter-Asia School. Another person I would like to acknowledge is, of course, Professor Wakabayashi Chiu of Okinawa University, who has been offering tireless support, trust, and resources for my intellectual journey. Without her generosity, I wasn't even able to meet people like Andy and Quan-shin and all of you here. Last but not least, since I saw your face, Megan, I want to say thank you to Professor Megan Morris of University of Sydney, who very kindly helped me share with our friends and colleagues of the Australian Society of Asian Humanities about this event. Today, what I'm going to talk about is a talk for the next about like 30 minutes or so, yes, is about my book, Translocal Island of Okinawa. But I'm not here to give you a sort of a didactic lecture about the book, yeah, or like about my thought. My stance is rather opposite. As I mentioned a moment ago, I see this book as a product of my long and many, and actual and imaginary conversations with my friends and colleagues in Taiwan, Okinawa, mainland China, South Korea, Japan, as well as Australia and elsewhere. So one of the major reasons why I asked Andy for this event, like about a half a year ago, was that I would like to kind of use this opportunity to return a small portion of what I received from everyone as a token of my appreciation. Though it is hard to sum up, as it will soon reveal itself, what I've learned, and I'm still learning from our friends involved in the inter-ages school, is, in essence, the importance of a constant struggle and make, like the effort, not only to intervene in the sense or the ambience that surrounds and shape the discourses and our perspectives on East Asia and beyond, but also to show visions and to carve out new spaces for critical actions vis-a-vis what I call the Cold War geopolitical reductionism, which I'll explain later shortly. That said, however, I'm conscious of my own positionality, my own politics, and my own sense of reality, which probably might sound peculiar or sort of naive, or which might dissonate with yours. So please feel free to disagree with me or to take critical stance towards my thought, and I'm open always to any feedback, right, and comments regardless. As I believe in the power of dialogue and reflexivity. So this is the today's outline. So first I will talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, hopefully, on the context and the content of the book, especially in relation to the key concept of the book, which is the Translocal Island of Okinawa. After that, I try my best to do a sort of a critical reflection, talking about the issues that I couldn't overcome or resolve, even after squeezing my head a number of times in the course of writing this book. So first, let me talk about like some background involved in this in writing this book. So the book consists of 7 chapters, including the introductory and concluding chapters. Chapter 1, which I will discuss some more detail later, is to set the course of this book, and this is where I present the key questions and argument. Some of the questions I try to address here are these. For example, is it possible to conceive an Okinawa's local political and social identity that is manifested through a language of transborder politics? If so, what is the specific register of the language? Also, what are the historical contexts that allow the local identity to reveal itself as such? And lastly, how a broader political space, such as East or Northeast Asia region, is relevant to the formation of local identity. So, but why Okinawa? Sometimes people ask me, especially in English-speaking country, if I am from, the region, especially in terms of a kinship, right? Whether it be their disappointment or not, that's not my issue. However, I'm not from Okinawa. I was born in an industrial town, like near Tokyo, called Kawasaki, to a Korean mother and a Japanese father whose family, was a Japanese migrant in Peru, and they came back after the war. And so my first visit to Okinawa was during my undergraduate as a part of the group trip organized by my university in Tokyo, my undergraduate university, which was called a peace study tour, like the name of this trip. The actual first visit was planned as a high school student, when I was a high school student, as a part of the school excursion. But it was disrupted by 9/11 in 2009. 2001. I still vividly remember our classroom teacher said to us in those days that they had to decide to cancel the trip because he said like something like along the line of the there are a lot of American bases in Okinawa, which could be a target of another terrorist attack or something. That was the kind of official reasons like given to the student as justification for canceling the school excursion. In any case, it was this first trip to Okinawa in 2008, through which I was introduced like Okinawa's historical experience, and it was so deeply imprinted in my memory to the extent that compelled me to feel the need to study further. During this early period of my endeavor, I found an old book kept in my father's bookshelf. This dusty old, the second-hand book I saw was Okinawa Sengoshi, or in English title, Okinawan Post-War History, co-authored by Nakano Yoshio and Arasaki Moriteru. The latter one, Professor Arasaki, who later became a known figure, key contributor to the Inter-Asia School. For someone whose research is like, oh, hang on, this is not the one. For someone whose research interest vaguely revolved around a civic activism and a history, like of modern Japan and East Asia and international relations, what Arasaki's book intrigued me was not only its really well-structured illustration of the post-war history of Okinawa until its problematic administrative handover to Japan in May 1972, but also his reflective positioning of Okinawa's post-war history within a region, within the broader political architecture, i.e. the San Francisco system, which played a decisive role in defining the regional order in not only East Asia, but also, I emphasize here, the Pacific. Because Arasaki incisively points out that Japan's peace treaty should be considered in tandem with what is called ANZUS. Like it's a kind of acronym of the security pact signed between Australia, Australia, the United States, and New Zealand. Just a week prior to Japan's signing of the peace treaty, exactly the same table, exactly the same place. So, as Professor Wakabayashi said in her article, Vision and Method in Okinawan Contemporary History, published in 2006, Arasaki was one of the very few figures in his generation who explored the historical development of Okinawa's political subordination and local resistance by taking into account the international politics of Cold War in Asia. Another yet related important cultural critical juncture is in the middle of conceiving the basic idea of this book came in 2011. Then US President Barack Obama and Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard stood side by side, literally, as we see in the photo, on the podium of the Australian Air Base in Darwin, which is like northern tip of the Australian continent, where they announced the rotation plan of the US Marines between Darwin, Guam, and Okinawa, and the establishment of the permanent camp of the US Marines to increase the defense capability across the equator in the west of the Pacific Ocean. In response to this unprecedented event, though Australia was the host, has been hosting this massive intelligence facility called in a place called Panga, but there was no historical record like until this moment that the American Marines established base permanently. So in response to this unprecedented event, the local residents in Darwin organized a group called Base Watch. And especially my friend Justin Tuffy, who also made a crucial contribution, made a crucial contribution to writing, to the course of writing this book. Through those events, I was reminded of Arasaki's insightful argument on the need to have a broader international politics, international relations, by including Australia, and later New Zealand came into my vision after I moved to the country, in my cognitive map to consider the historical roles Okinawa play in the region. Of course, these are like just some of the notable events or like examples that lie underneath of the book. Yeah. But while being cognizant and conscious of those historical political relations between Okinawa and the rest of the Asia and the Pacific, however, during my doctoral years in Canberra, I wasn't quite able to clearly articulate the whole different pieces, into one thread, right? So it took another 5 years for me to be able to formulate my thoughts. And during this period, I received even further insight from the works of my friends and colleagues from the Asia School, including, or like especially here, Andy's remarkable article written, published in 2019, Post-Colonial Geography, Post-Cold War Implication, Okinawa, Taiwan, and Hong Kong as a Liminal Island Chain. If you haven't read it, please do. It's really, really powerful article. Now, so like these are the kind of the background context, right? And now let's move on to from the context to content of the book. As I said, like this book has 7 chapters, and from chapter 2 to 6, I discuss basically the development of what it's called, what is often regarded or like referred to as the Okinawan struggle, which I define here a broad, like a generic term, which denotes an aggregation of different activisms undertaken by an array of various communities and individuals. The key focus here is to trace the history of local activism through the lens of what I call grassroots regionalism, which, hang on, lost track. Yes, sorry. So, which I define as a thought and action undertaken by Okinawan citizens who created in different historical moments their local, in quotation mark, local identity based on their extensive sense of social space. So I started with the stories entailed in creation of the first island-wide land rights movement in 1956, and there I elaborated in like how this the so-called Okinawan struggle, like the space, like would emerged or like created, and in the next chapter, like how the different individuals and communities incrementally and increasingly, and also fragmentedly, created local civic politics by articulating the borders creatively to enact their identity, including Asian neighbors such as the Philippines and South Korea in the 1980s and 1990s. So this grassroots regionalism, enables us to consider the sites, right? Sites of actions that are neither pre-given nor predetermined, but like it is a product of those historical processes. In this respect, this concept, grassroots regionalism, allows us to bring to the fore the historical process in which people constructed these sites, their sites of resistance and the civic actions that are generally perceived as Okinawa. Well, so this is this idea is based on the mixture of a different scholarship, right? Such as if I pick some of them, like Henry Ruevel's the production of a space, but in a more recent cases like Arjun Padrais, like process-based geographies, or Willem van Schandel's articulation of Zomia. Yet the list also includes Tatsumori Suzuki's invisible regionalism, and here Quan Xin Chen's Asia's method, and Pagonso's thesis of East Asia's three core sites. And of course, lastly, but not least, Arasaki Moriteru's work on the space of livelihood in East China Sea. And all of which I, like conceived or presented or like translated in the first decade of 2000. Yeah, so like this, the reason why I highlighted here is that this first decade of 2000 is important because in hindsight, it is a like it is the second half of the so-called post-Cold War period, like a post-Cold War, like order or regime or like something like that, right? As well as the first decade of the 21st century. Anyway, so the challenge here, is to see the boundary of locality that is determined dynamically and creatively by historical forces. And the aforementioned scholarship is important as they evocatively and provocatively argue for the need to take people's actions into account as a crucial definer in this process. Drawing on a various range of critical literature, I argue that we are able to acknowledge various kinds, various ways of manifestation of locality and local political identity that are manifested through a language of transborder politics, as opposed to another sense of area, which is more like kind of determined by the institutional and administrative authority. So, let's move back to the chapter 1 of my book, which I will sort of elaborate a little more. So, like in this book, translocality is considered to be a kind of perspective concept to see through this historical forces and manifestation of the people's political identity that are not always reducible into a monolithic articulation of a local identity. Then why is this idea, concept of translocality so important? My argument is this. Today, our sense of the reality are, to a critical extent, shaped by a series of talks based on the geopolitics, mobilizing the language of a security analyst, typified as, this statement, national security is the exclusive matter of the national government. And this isn't just a case of like we hear in like East Asian societies. As I heard the same concern from my friend in Sicily, in Italy, for example, when we talk about NATO, or in places like Australia and New Zealand, where I think I'm more now familiar with than anywhere else. But now in this like region, here it means Australia or like New Zealand, Oceania. Now we don't talk about ANZUS or even Five Eyes anymore, but more fancy words are like AUKUS and free and open Indo-Pacific, embodied as a Quad. For example, the mainstream Australian media, let alone New Zealand, of course, are no longer talking about a plausibility of those security pacts, but how to best implement, these policies, or like this new architecture. The institutions such as National Security College, based at the ANU, or the National Center for Security Studies, like of my university, invest immensely in promoting security talk by using and choosing the language and the topics that sound reasonable, not to hardcore conservatives, but to left-wing audiences. The concepts such as deglobalization, unlike Walden Bellows' first coinage, is unreflectively, I would argue here strongly, misused to explain the decoupling of the US market from mainland China in various places. For the past 10 years or so, we clearly witnessed how what the security experts call the new, in quotation mark, new Cold War, has been constructed as part of our social reality. Although we have a number of literature showing how, like its predecessor, the old Cold War, became a part of our social reality, right? As a result, we seem to have a return to an era which our colleague based in Sydney, Louis Edwards, rightly described as an old-style village life insularity. Right. So, if I may, just like to kind of read some of the parts. Right. So, Louis Edwards, like arguing, watching out for any threat the outsider might pose to the status quo, gossiping about their, strange habit, raising eyebrows when they speak their lingo, like they're chuckling at their accented English, right? So, this is a kind of, what she argued, like there's a kind of, like a sort of a, what I sort of tried to raise later on, as a part of the kind of examples of how this so-called Cold War geopolitical reductionism kind of shaped our sort of, not just imagination, but also like kind of our sense of language, how we speak, right? But let's move on to the next. So this social duality, which uncritical and unreflective mantra, partially equating such notion as a free and a peace in the local society under the rhetoric of the new Cold War, is what I flagged as cautiously the geopolitical Cold War reductionism. And here is like what I argued. So this kind of discursive manipulation of local reality is not new in the history of Okinawan anti-base politics, right? Like anti-authoritarian movements in post-colonial nation in East Asia during the Cold War, such as Korea and perhaps probably in Taiwan as well, political bipolarization through the trope of the pro-government and anti-government forces is so deeply entrenched in the society that this antagonistic Cold War rhetoric is felt as if it still haunts the physical and mental alleyways of a significant part of Okinawan society. So in kind of quotation mark, I borrowed from I borrowed a sentence of one of the texts written by Jason Morris Suzuki. Also, this kind of binary logic reformulates the meaning of place, most typically as trouble land, so that Okinawa's base politics is often called Okinawa problem. But why is that, right? Okinawa Mondai. Therefore, I tentatively call the Cold War geopolitical reductionism play a crucial role in the affirmation of this divisive rhetoric, divisive rhetoric to be employed, structured, and ultimately felt as real at a societal level. Okay, a few more slides, and then we'll finish. While I'm against a Cold War geopolitical reductionism, this doesn't mean, also I emphasize here, this doesn't mean that I reject the entire discussion of geopolitics. On the contrary, it's been a profound source of inspiration to engage in the critical analysis of Okinawa's political constraints and subjectivity. The series of pioneering works by, for example, just as the case Arasaki Moriteru, are one of the great examples in this sense. For example, in his speech delivered in 1988 at a graduation ceremony of Okinawa University, Arasaki was then the president of the university, so delivered a speech, and he said to the attendees that Okinawa's locational advantage enables us to be diagnostic about the limits and the problems of post-war Japanese politics. particularly in relation to the United States, while at the same time, it allows us to see the similarities between Okinawa's post-war path and that of the other post-colonial nations in East Asia. He said Okinawa's distinctive characteristic, not shared by the rest of the country, means, he argued, that Okinawa has a privilege of the standpoint. In Japanese translation, it's called Ninshiki no Yuetsei. So if you could understand the Japanese, I sort of tried to change, like, to deliver the tone, like no nuance of the word. Yeah. And also, we now see many grassroots actions taken against not only the strategization of the Western Pacific, but also political discourses. A good example here is a friend of mine, again, I'm sorry, based in Wollongong near Sydney, about 2 hours away, called Alexander Brown. He is currently working as a research officer at a public sector, but also, like, he's an academic. So, like, authored books such as anti-nuclear protests in post-Fukushima Tokyo, and more recently, online version of the book called Contesting Nuclear Age, which he powerfully elucidates the history of grassroots action, the grassroots solidarity movement between Japanese and Australian anti-nuclear activists during the after the war. So, and also he's a professional translator, right? As well as organizer of the activism based in Wollongong. So why Wollongong, right? Probably many of us, haven't heard the name Wollongong, but this place, right? And he and his friends in the local area, like, recently started anti-AUKUS campaign, because a port, like this Wollongong is a beautiful port city, right, with a beautiful beach. But like, it was chosen as one of the key 3 possible hosts of nuclear submarines that Australia bought as a part of this deal, like over AUKUS. Right, so just a few comments about my, like, self sort of critical, reflective criticism of my own. First thing is that, as I said at the beginning of the talk, this, like, whole argument that I presented today in front of you is based on a sort of my understanding of the current political, social settings in the region. That means it's kind of a reflective of my own positionality and politics, right? And so it'd be great, like, if I could hear your view as, like, a resident, a citizen living in this place, Taiwan, or in case Chiyo Sensei from Okinawa, or elsewhere if you're attending, including online, right? About yeah, so, like, all sort of the criticism and stuff like that is just all welcome, right? And this kind of, it's hard to sort of break through, but at the same time, I acknowledge my own limits, yeah, and sort of the perspective that I take. Yeah, a few more things. There are a few more things that I want to add here, like, as a kind of the comment to myself, but just I'll like wrap it up here. And thanks for your listening.
Thank you very much, Shin, for this really informative talk. I think you also cut short a bit because the book seems to be a lot more than just what you said. But I think what you're highlighting in terms of geopolitical reductionism was really helpful. Partly, I think, in terms of understanding the region has been very much overdetermined by these geopolitical languages, right? So the Cold War, the new Cold War, as if people living in the space necessarily have to be entangled in all of that. One of the very sort of funny commentary that I heard lately, also happening in this room, is that there's a bunch of international relations scholars commingling in the room, talking about how Taiwan needs to be more committed to its self-defense, right? And then we have this scholar colleague saying that if people come in, yep, sure. So this colleague was saying that, so this is a room of scholars in international relations talking about Taiwan's national defense, right? And how the US or the West needs to come into support. But this colleague was saying that, so if you come from the outside, meaning not from Taiwan, and look at what's, how the Taiwanese are living their everyday life, you'll be surprised. They will be surprised at how easygoing people have been feeling here, as if it's not in a war zone, right? And therefore, the question for them is that how come the Taiwanese are not feeling as committed to their defense as the U.S. That is now being conceiving them? And I think that's very much a sort of a geopolitical thinking that I think Shin's presentation really was trying to kind of push back, right? To say people living in the area have their own way of dealing with the problem, right? And therefore, the kind of geopolitical language is actually more reductive than constructive. And I think what is also very helpful is that while the focus of the book is really on Okinawa, Shin is able to kind of expand it out to a larger conversation, bringing in a critique of all these present sort of war mentality that is very much in our everyday mainstream media. So I really appreciate that you're initiating us into that conversation. And I think that one other thing I want to say is that your mentioning of various scholars that was inspiring and helpful to your research, particularly Arasaki Moriteru, whose work really sort of offers an anchoring of the discussion, right, in the local, right? And I know that your recent project is actually to do a sort of intellectual biography of Arasaki. So I thought that angle and perspective in terms of locating or anchoring our discussion in the local intellectual circle was also very important and helpful. And with that, I think Wakabayashi Sensei would be a wonderful interlocutor for this conversation, for the fact that she has been living in Okinawa for a very long time, been teaching Okidai for so many years, and also very intensively engaged in Okinawa local politics and activism. So I'm sure she would have a lot more to say, both to help help us to expand our conversation, but also to engage with Shin's book. So without further ado, we'll have Chill.
Okay. I don't have a PowerPoint this say. So I'm keenly pleased to have this opportunity, and it is a privilege to share this moment with you all here and online. My name is Chiyo Wakabayashi. I'm from Okinawa University, and I'm studying, researching contemporary history of Okinawa, especially the Okinawan society and politics under the American occupation. And I teach contemporary history of Okinawa and international history at Okinawa University. Thank you for this opportunity. I thank Andy and Shin and staff of Academia Sinica. And also I appreciate so much encouragement and support from our friends of the Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Society. And Shin told me his plan of this book, actually at the time of PhD dissertation in spring 2011, when he visited me in Okinawa. I think it's right after the disastrous earthquake, Northern Japan earthquake and nuclear crisis. So since then, I've been waiting for this book with anticipation. For Shin has worked hard and generously to bridge between Okinawa and other part of Asia Pacific region through teaching, translating, researching, to connect peoples. One of the respected environmental justice activists in Okinawa, Hideki Yoshikawa, his name actually was not mentioned in Shin's book, but who actually attended the IUCN conference introduced in this book. He often uses the term connecting the dots when he described the efforts to create movement across the borders. Connecting the dots evokes the image of the lines connecting people and people or place to place. But now Shin's emphasis on the concept of translocal and grassroots regionalism might further expand that image of a dot to the line toward a space or more sphere. So at the same time, Shin carefully introduces the context, reflects in the individual's actions and emotions, such as Professor Arasaki, Shimao Toshio, the post-war Japan's prominent novelist based on the Amami Island, citizens participating in the Okinawa's solidarity movement with South Korea, and so on. And Shin examines the history and the oppressiveness of spaces such as Okinawa, Korea, or Asia as a whole. I know it is not easy to overcome historical difficulties, difficult relations in Asia. We still live in the world shaped by imperialism, colonialism, and the Cold War. And its history continues to influence our lives and our awareness of the modern world in complex way. Nevertheless, I think these two concepts Shin courageously put here could help us to step forward to more constructive discussion. Today, Okinawa is going through a difficult time, decade after the struggle from 1995 to 2015, which has been called the third wave of anti-base struggle. I think this mentioned in Shin's book. I found out that in everyday life, various kind of ideological apparatus is attempting to convince common people in Okinawa that giving up struggle or forgetting the past, such kind are, forgetting the past or giving up struggle is the only wisest path. Wisest, I mean, it seems like such ideological apparatus is attempting to such things to everyday life. So the anti-base movement in Okinawa is now in very difficult phase. People are confronted with a strong and complex hegemonic structure of capitalism, the state, and militarism. This hegemonic structure demands implicitly and explicitly people to give up memorizing the history of struggles. It attempts to make people overestimate those in power and believe that people are powerless. I'm not psychological major, but if I can say, it seems some kind of gaslighting. Militarism and statism relentlessly damage the space and lives of Okinawa politically, culturally, and socially, while making people doubt their own perceptions and memories. People in small associations, which Shin have introduced in this book, also has been suffered in such social, political, and cultural situation. They are now aging, and there are not many young generations to succeed them. So it is true that Okinawa's young people are not participating in the anti-base movement in large numbers. But it is not simply because of the gap between generations. As a university teacher, I understand very well that the younger generation do not see hopes for the future of Okinawa in militarism rule A future with military bases never be the future for all generations of Okinawa and Okinawa. Rather, the stagnation of the movement, which seems to be a generational gap at the first glance, but this is largely due to dependent economic and social development. In addition, the conventional movement centered on political parties in Okinawa tends to neglect the discussion of overcoming such developmentalist economic reductive social development. I'm not going to expand on this discussion entirely here. However, I appreciate Shin's focus on the cross-border practices of small local associations, because each small association has a very limited power, but I believe that the myriad of functioning of these small associations could be the basis for larger social change. And one important truth is, as he pointed out, the emotions of each individual in the movement is supported. In particular, I have been impressed by the story about Toshio Takahashi in Shin's book. Toshio-san is one of the activists I've trusted for years, and I learned a lot from him in everyday life. Like Toshio-san, I myself from a provincial town in Japan's mainland, and I sympathize with his dedication to the grassroots movement in Okinawa. At the same time, although it is not mentioned much in Shin's book, Toshio-san himself works in the small associations for mentally ill people and their families on a daily basis. His deep emotions are consistent. Toshio-san is a person who listens to voices that are difficult to hear, and he has the ability to understand others without modernized modernized way. I believe that there are many people like Toshio-san in local communities and social movements throughout Asia and around the world. I think that by meeting such people, we will be able to understand the area deeply. I understand that Shin used the word grassroots for regionalism to emphasize these people. I may have more to say, but I'd like to conclude my remarks with two final questions. First question is about the concept of home. In the final chapter, Shin introduces the concept of home as a support for grassroots regionalism. However, the explanation is still not quite comprehensible to me. This is because, as with people like not only me or Toshio-san, but as well as Professor Arasaki and Shimao Toshio, the concept of home is a very difficult concept to fit in, because it is not possible for us to make a simple interpretation of where you were born or raised. Rather, sometimes we feel like out of place or wavering sometimes. So I'd be happy if you could expand on this explain some on this concept a little bit more. It would be helpful if we understand the term translocal. Second question in this book, Shin uses a term Cold War military security reductionism to describe international politics in East Asia. Today, not only the United States and Japan, but also South Korea, Taiwan, mainland China, and even North Korea, East Asian states do not feel at all that there is a contradiction in the fact that Okinawa is under such an excessive military burden. I think it's the same for Australia, the United Kingdom, and South Asian countries, and India. In such realm of statism, Okinawa is settled so lonesome and isolated. In such international conditions, what kind of development path is possible for grassroots solidarity movement in the post-pandemic period? What kind of daily practice can be considered? And if you have any good ideas, I'd be grateful if you share with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chill. Those are very powerful and important questions. I'm sure Shin's going to have to entertain us with some of the possible answers. I also find what Chill was saying very, very helpful in a sense of bringing up the importance of memory and and a dire question about generational gap. As we see in a lot of the movement sites, if you take a higher position and look over, you'll probably see more people with white hair than people with black hair. And I think these sort of the issues of continuity of activism and cause and how to adapt it, with time, will be very important to activism organizers or movement organizers, as well as participants. In other words, what is the cause, right? That is keeping us going, right? And how do we stay relevant and stay, energized when the situation has become so difficult, as in the case of Okinawa, this being the third wave, since the post-war years for Okinawa anti-base movement. So how do we learn from the defeat and continue despite the defeat? I thought those are very important questions for us to kind of to think about. Finally, we'll have Hao Min to give Shin his feedback and commentaries. Please speak slowly, and also give me some pauses so that I can do the translation. So thank you. Let's have Hao Min.
Okay, I'm sorry I have to speak in Chinese. Okay. 好，不好意思，我必须要用中文讲。那大家好，我是罗浩明。首先就是也很荣幸今天可以跟Takahashiさん跟Wakabayashiさん有一个这样对谈的机会。
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Hao Min. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to be in a dialogue with Takahashi-san and Wakabayashi-san. I'm sorry I have to speak in Chinese.
我今天比较想要从台湾的角度出发，讨论一下冲绳对我们来讲是什么，又以我的专业来说，从思想跟思想史的角度提供一些参考的资料给大家。
I want to speak today from the perspective or the vantage point of Taiwan to think about what Okinawa means and is to us, particularly in the context of the intellectual history.
OK，就我的理解，在台湾的对冲绳的几个诠释啊，首先是一种小国寡民式的孤岛的抵抗，也就是说，将冲绳的反基地运动以及反富贵运动等等视为反内部殖民，也就是反日本殖民的自立或者是独立，这是第一种。
Okay, want to begin by explaining how Taiwanese usually perceive Okinawa to be. For example, it's usually understood to be a form of anti-internal colonialism within Japan, fighting against this larger forces for independence.
那第二种呢，就是我们可以说稍微括号内的左翼嘛，就是在反美军基地的这样的视角下，把它视为反帝国主义、反殖民主义大架构下的重要角色。
The second perception is more leftist oriented, thinking about the Okinawan struggle as a form of anti-imperialism, anti-US imperialism in particular.
OK， 但是对我来讲，这两种视角，恐怕都有缺陷，而且是缺了非常重要的地方，也就是缺少了对于在地或者是 local 的或是生活的重视。那这一点呢，也就是Arasaki 先生所说的对于生活圈的重视，这个东西是被忽略的。
And both of these perceptions feels to me to be lacking an emphasis on both life and livelihood, as what Professor Arasaki Moriteru has said about the importance of a living sphere as part of the in this area in which Okinawa is a very vital part of.
那更是这样的生活的重视，才是对我来说，才是对于 冲绳的思想里面反国家或者是解构 nationalism， 就是解构国族主义的伦理的核心来源呢。
And this emphasis on life, livelihood, and living sphere, to me, is what is so important about Okinawan intellectual thought in thinking against nationalism or deconstructing nationalism.
OK，那在那个 Takahashi さん的书里面，我读到的关于 translocal 的概念是这个样子的，就是它既非上升统合成为 nation， 也不是由 local 收敛成为一个排他的私有的国家，就是 okuni， 而是持续变形或是反定型的动态的 local。
And this is where Takahashi's discussion of the translocal is very helpful. In a way, as I understand it to be, translocal in his book means that it is not a form of nation, nor that is exclusive, nor merely a form of the local, which is also exclusively national. Instead, it's more of a continuous transformation, a sort of dynamic local in the formation.
对，就像是在书中引用的 Arasaki Moriteru さん所说的那个互动的，这是一个互动的过程，也就是becoming 或者是说 naru 在日文里面 naru， 而不是 de aru， 也不是是或是 is。也就是说，这样的一个 translocal 其实反映了某一种对于本质主义的否定。
Yeah, therefore, what it means, in the words of Yakabi Osamu, who is an Okinawan intellectual, this dynamic local is actually an interactive process of becoming, rather than is. It is a refusal instead of any form of essentialism.
OK， 那更仔细的说，也就是说，并非回归冲绳原来的样子，或是本来纯粹的冲绳，而是在探讨在怎么样的过程中变成了现在的冲绳。
So the point is not to restore what Okinawa looked like before, or that is supposedly purely Okinawan, but rather to understand how Okinawa has become what it is today.
那么，同样的，在这样的观点下的冲绳历史文化以及反基地运动，是如同书中所说的是连结的，是流动的。
So this perspective, in this perspective, the translocal Okinawa is an articulation of connection, and also an articulation of fluidity rather than something fixed.
那具体来讲，我很喜欢那个Takahashiさん的一个比喻，就是把它当成一个漩涡的这样的概念，就是多个流动相遇的过程。那在这个过程里面，基本上我们是取消边界的。
And therefore, I think this description in Takahashi's book about the translocal, in the name of vortex, I believe, which is a sort of commingling of various strands. And in this commingling, all the borders were dismissed.
OK， 那在里面还有两件事情，就是关于 Arasaki さん提到的那个所谓地缘政治，必须要建立在人对于自己土地跟生活的控制，这个东西也是值得留意的事情。
Another thing to take note of is this idea of the geopolitics as being reductively understood as a form of domination of the land.
还有另外就是信主 Ryukyu さん所提到关于伤口如何成为一个sakeme， 如何成为一个裂缝，进而成为一个重新回探历史的回路，这个提醒也是很重要的。
Another important reminder in response to this, or as a part of this translocal understanding, is Shinjo Ikuyo's concept of the wound, which can be understood as a cleavage, which can be turned into a circuit, a sort of restructuring process.
好，那关于这个书中，我想要特别是针对反复归论有进行一些讨论。首先，反复归论对我来说是拒绝有两件事情，第一是拒绝与日本的统合，第二件事情是拒绝国族主义的伦理。
So Takahashi's book also talks about the history and the discourse of the anti-reversionism that took place in the 1970s. And there are two things that are very important about it. One is the refusal towards an integration with Japan, and the other is the refusal of nationalist ideology or logic.
那在反富贵论里面，以及在Takahashi上的书里面，其实也多次的强调关于自立跟独立的差异。这个我想是在讨论冲绳反富贵论的时候是非常重要的一件事情。
And there's one nuance to be noticed is this differentiation between 自立 meaning autonomy or self-reliance versus 独立 which is oftentimes translated as independence. And I think this differentiation is very important to note.
那反富贵论里面基本上有3个比较重要的思想家，一个是阿拉高阿基拉，他主张民主主义是朝向国家想象收敛的东西。那他主张冲绳的异族性作为异质的去毁灭或者是去破坏所谓的国家。但是对不起，但是我们要注意的事情是，阿拉高瓦的主语是冲绳人。
So there are 3 important thinkers in this anti-reversion discourse. The first one is Arakawa Akira. His understanding of anti-reversion is a form of renouncing the fantasy towards the nation state. And the subject of this renunciation is the Okinawan.
好，刚刚那个主语是值得注意的。另外2件事情，Okamoto桑讲的事情就会比较像是去讨论、主张分析共同体的生理 Kyoto Taino Seiri 这样的一个机制。那川满信Kawamichi Shinji桑就是今年过世的这个前辈，他主张的是去分析民主主义的机制，并且将之解体，最后迈向所谓的共和社会，而不是共和国。
And then the other 2 thinkers, one is Okamoto. His idea is to kind of understand the anatomy of a community. That is how a community is formed. And the other one is Kawamitsu Shinichi, who recently passed away this year. And he wanted to kind of dissect the nationalist community by thinking about a sort of communal society that we can move towards, which may not necessarily be a form of nation.
那以下我想要引用一些川满信先生的文本，就是翻译上可能有点难，不好意思。就是首先，川满信先生讲的事情是我照念啊，对于人民来说，所谓的民主主义，既不是从统治者角度思考的爱国精神，也不是民族的骄傲，而是与支配的压迫与剥削程度成正比的愤怒以及救赎渴望的复合情感。因此，它不是对以权力或剥夺为根基而成立的国家，或者是对于作为其空洞概念的民族所抱持的爱与骄傲。翻译不好意思，谢谢。
So this is to explicate what I said earlier by a quotation of 这个是那个川满吗？还是
川满
by taking this quotation from Kawamitsu-san. And this is the quotation in translation. For the people, nationalism is not a form of patriotic spirit considered from the perspective of the ruler, nor is it a form of national pride. Instead, it is a very complex feelings about domination and exploitation that is comparably relegated or manifested in anger and the aspiration for redemption or salvation. And therefore, this is not, therefore, the sort of nation it imagines is not one based upon power and deprivation, nor not a state that is based on power and deprivation, nor a nation that is created out of nothingness. But rather a form of love and pride.
另外也想引用这个文本，那这边我就不照念了。简单的说，对于川满信先生来说的话，他要在意的事情是天皇制也好，民主主义也好，是在怎么样的机制上吸引了岛上的人走到了负面的那样子的地步。那民众的，就像我蓝字标示的，这些民众的民主主义是以什么样的目标出现的？恐怕要从思考解体这些问题开始，才可以重新找到所谓民众的思想。
Therefore, for Kawami's-san, the important question for him is to kind of think beyond, for example, the system of the emperor, right? And think about what really bring people together, and how and what would be the kind of what would be the form of nationalism that is people-based rather than systematically formed from the above. And therefore, for us today in thinking about Okinawa, the importance to kind of try to reach into the people's thought, particularly how they cut off from those traps of domination.
也就是说，我们并不是只是将民族主义视为一个必须要踢开来讨论的东西，而是在民族主义的背后唤起它的所谓共同劳动、共同生存，在日文是 Kyoto Kyosei 的思想。
So in other words, what he is advocating is not merely a simple reductive critique of nationalism, but to dig deeper into how the idea of the nation evoke the possibility of working together, or laboring together and living together.
好，那这样子关于民族主义的解体作业，让我联想到塔尼高干在解构军国主义民众的原点的一个思想。这边我稍微先跳过。简单的讲，就是如果对于刚刚Kawamichi新吉上来说 ，nationalism 是必须要被解体的，那么对于塔尼高干来讲，军国主义的民众，他同时是召唤或是成立军国主义的来源的同时，也是在对于村落的乌托邦的想象中长出来的某一种欲望，或是某一种所谓的前劳动阶级思想。
Okay, this is getting a bit more complicated here, for me anyhow. So the Kawami-san's idea of decomposition or decomposing the nation state can also be related to this other intellectual discourse of the origin, which is the discourse of origin by Tanikawa again. For him, what he means by the point of origin is not merely a form of so like a lineage or bloodline or some kind of since the ancient times, right? That kind of almost ancestral retracing of the origin as a point of beginning. Instead, what he wants to understand is how such an idea actually came from a very parochial, almost village-like kind of mindset.
好，谢谢。那简单的说，所谓的origin 就是原点或是 local， 并不是所谓的祖先独特的独立独自的文化圈、血缘、遥远的过去、自古以来等等这些概念，而是刚刚提到的流动的日常，以及我想要强调的权力的关系性。
Therefore, the important concept for Tanikawa Ken is that is the fluidity of everydayness. And the kind of relationality that has grown out of that.
好，那最后Kawamichi新喜上在1981年在琉球共和社会宪法的思案里面，因此在提到在此高声宣言废除国家，他是站在刚刚我提到阿拉高阿基拉上的主词是冲绳人，但是在Kawamichi上的里面，他的主词并不是冲绳人，而是任何认同这个概念的人都一起在此高声宣言废除国家。
And so Kawamichi-san has written this article called Okinawan Communal Society Constitution C Plan or Draft C, in which he actually makes this claim that we should we should announce the nation as our principle for the manifesto. And by this we, it means anyone who identifies with this principle.
好，那这个地方可能我稍微讲短一点。我要提的事情是关于当时也有一个年轻的团体叫做冲绳青年同盟。那这边参加的是那个中里伊沙桑，也有参加这样的一个运动。他们在国会里面释放了爆竹，然后批判当时要批准冲绳回归的国会的决定，以及宣告 他们的主体性。
So as early as 1971, there was this organization called the Youth Alliance of Okinawa, or Okinawans. They started a protest by setting off firecrackers within the Congress, so as to kind of demolish this whole idea of the Okinawan reversion.
那这边我不稍微展开，我想要强调的事情是，当时的讨论里面有几个重要的概念。第一个是关于民族自决论以及人民权利论之间的分裂。第二点事情是他们的运动在他们的pamphlet 他们的传单里面有提到与第三世界论还有去殖民论的亚洲地域之间的连结。
And the reason why I want to bring this up is because in this Youth Alliance of Okinawans, they in their anti-reversion campaign, there are two very important concepts. One is the idea of national self-determination, which is separated from the idea or the discourse on people's right. And the second point, which is also important, is they actually emphasize this third world ism as the foundation for decolonization, and the decolonization, which is based in the articulation of Asia as such.
还有另外一个重要的可以讨论的问题是在1970年前后新左翼的 sector 就党派们与冲绳复归或反复归论运动之间的矛盾。具体来讲是关于冲青委海帮派与中和派之间的分裂。那还有在书中Takahashi先生书中提到的 Takahashi Toshio さん，他是阁老写嘛 Kakuroku ですかね。这个也就是说我整理一下1971年前后本土的亚麻朵的新左翼党派与在日本的冲绳人或是冲绳反复归论的运动者之间，它是有矛盾的。这个矛盾也许是值得深究的话题。
Okay, and this one other point I want to put out here in relation to this anti-reversion campaign is that there is a sectarian conflict between people on the left, and this part of this formation, this conflict is actually based upon the Yamato, meaning the Japanese, versus the Okinawans.
好，接下来在书中提到了关于琉球湖跟那个住民运动跟住民运动的关系，我觉得这一章非常的有肉身，就是非常的实在哦。
And there's a chapter in Takahashi-san's book, which chapter is that?
4.
Chapter 4, which I think is very fully fleshed, and I really appreciate that.
具体来讲，就是在复归之后的所谓的住民运动，以在地生活空间连结的这些运动，找出了一个左右以外的抗争形式。这个是Takahashi上的话。
And I think the contribution of this chapter is that it came out of this anti-reversion history and discourse. He found there is this new discussion of the movement for residents of the Okinawan arc, and I thought this really departs from the earlier sectarian conflict and offers a new point of departure for thinking about belonging, not so much belonging, but thinking about activism in Okinawa.
那Takahashi上也有提到那个 ARC 的草根地域主义将琉球湖的内部的隔绝。就是Arasaki上讲的还有差異多样性，从负面的要素转变成一个正面的多元的形式，并且加以实在化。那这一点恐怕也是Arasaki 先生重要的一个点。
I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought here. But if I gather this right from the note here, is that I think this transition from the mass movement to strike to finally the movement of the residents creates a form of struggle that is beyond simply left and right, and allows the movement to articulate more strongly with local spaces and environmental issues, for example, on question of pollution or noise or ecological destruction.
谢谢。那我接下来想要讨论是Shimao Toshio 上的亚波内西亚的一个概念。我这边稍微有一些整理以及一些延伸的文本， 如果有时间的话，我们再读；没有时间的话，就是烦请等下会下面有出处，再请大家找来参考。
Okay, so the next point I want to talk about is Shimao Toshio, this intellectual, Japanese intellectual that Takahashi discussed in a book. I actually put together quite a few quotations, but in the interest of time, we may have to skip that. But there are references to that, so please feel free to consult them at your leisure.
简单的来说，从书中的读到的是关于 Japonesia 指的事情是一种多样性跟复数性，是对于日本民族国家统一性、单数性，以及地理上的关东或是 Yamato 区中心，或者是时间单线性的批判。
So simply put, for Shimao, the whole idea of the Japonesia, which is to understand Japan as a string of islands, is a way to speak against this sort of singularity or uniformity or of the Japanese nation, and also the kind of Kanto-centrism of Japan, as well as the kind of a critique of linearity of Japanese ancestry and lineage.
好，那关于那个喜马桑的那个 Japonesia 概念，有一个重要的民俗学家就是 Tanigawa Kenji， 他相当喜欢这样的概念，并且进而延伸提出了关于共识的 Kyoji的国家历史跟 Zushi的国家历史的差异。
And this other scholar called Tanikawa Genji developed Shimao's idea to account for this, to come up with the following concepts. For example, multi-genealogical time, or sort of cultural composite, or the kind of layeredness of consciousness, even synchronic versus diachronic national history.
简单的讲，也就是说，在 Japonesia 的概念里面，相对于一个单线性的日本或者是历史 ，Japonesia 讲的是一个多线性的时间轴，以及复合体，还有意识的重层性或是多层性。
Yeah. So in short, he wants to understand Japan from this multi-axial or multi-genealogical perspective, and look at Japan as a sort of continual process of multiple layering, rather than just a singularity of oneness.
好，关于Tanikawa Kenji 有几个文本，我这边就不展开了。一个是关于 Japonesia toは何か，就是 What is Japonesia， 这是一个很重要的文本，可能请大家参考。
So I wouldn't go into details on Tanikawa Genji's work, but I think this article, What is Japonesia, is a very helpful reference to have.
好，这个也是。另外还有一个是孤岛文化论。在这里面稍微讲一下好了。Tanikawa Genji 讲到了 Japonesia 的特征在于 micro 跟 poly， 相对于macro 跟 mono 这个大陆的概念。
So this other, in extension, this idea of the Japonesia, it emphasis on a micro and a poly aspect of the Japanese cultural formation, and it takes inspiration from Polynesian and Micronesia.
好，重要值得一提的是，其实 Tanikawa Genji 虽然强调了 micro 跟 poly， 但它并不意味着一个只是在空间层次上的事情，它也意味着他说的话，在面对大陆文化流入的时候，不被征服，而反而将其吸收消化的文化复合体。那也代表了在日本岛屿内部的多层性。还有更重要的事情是，日本资本主义跛行式进展所带来的各种现象。
And the emphasis on the poly and micro is important in the sense that it's not merely a concept, not merely a spatial concept, saying that you have this and that together. Instead, it's actually a process of digestion and absorption, in the sense that within Japan there are multiple spatial resonances as well as different layering of cultural elements, as manifested in the kind of backward capitalist development that Japan has brought about.
所以对于Tanikawa Genji 来说 ，Japonesia 这个概念其实强调了一个相对于 既不是中央也不是边境的这两个概念，而是边境作为一种不可视的文化中心。
So Japanasia creates this idea of understanding Japan not as central versus peripheral, but rather as the peripheral, as the sort of invisible center, or the invisible culture within the center.
那最后一段，关于田中健一的文本是我觉得非常有意思的，有鲁迅味道的一个文章，一段话，我接下来照着念哦。冲绳就像是一个放在火上的锅子，锅中的水是冲绳原本就有的东西，后来被丢入了产自日本本土与中国的材料，烧煮这锅的火是岛津、日本政府以及美国的军政府。经过漫长的岁月，锅中形成了一种带有复杂味道的汤汁，这种长期以来在小火中煎熬的痛苦，使得冲绳的风味变得独特。这种独特性超过了非此即彼的二元对立。
Okay, so this is a quotation from Tanikawa Genji, which I thought is very profound and interesting to think about Okinawa, and this is the translation in a very rough way. Okinawa is like a pot on the burner. The water in the pot is what is originally of Okinawa. However, a lot of different things were thrown into it, including stuff from China and Japan. The fire that is cooking up this pot is the Shimatsu, I think, which is one of the earlier Japanese power, the Japanese government and the American military government. After a long time, the water in the pot becomes a very complex soup, a soup with complex flavors. And this pan of being cooked up in small fires make the flavor of Okinawa very unique. This uniqueness is far beyond either this or that kind of dichotomy.
谢谢。但是呢，我刚刚强调了非常多 Tanikawa Genji 的一些文本，但必须要做一些反省的事情，是在这个东西之中，所谓的冲绳人是持续作为被书写的或是被分析的对象，而像 Tanikawa Genji 等人是通过冲绳与南岛论寻找所谓真正的 real 的日本。因此，冲绳并不是他们论述的终点，而是手段。所以，甚至可以稍微批判性的说，这样的论述反而使冲绳成为了一种方法，而不是一个论述的终点。
So what it needs to be careful about such discourses, Tanikawa's Kenji's, is that Okinawa is really just the means for them to get to an understanding of Japan rather than the end in itself. And therefore, we need to be very careful and cautious of how the means is actually put in service of the end.
那另外还有一点是值得注意的是，在西毛特社的论点里面，从早期 Japonesia 其实到了晚期，他开始使用小国寡民这样的词汇来描写他所谓的 Japonesia。换言之，所谓的 Japonesia 开始在后面似乎有一个窄化的一个现象。
And another thing to take note of is that as Tanikawa Genji develops the idea, this idea becomes a little bit more narrowed than it was, for example, in a place of Shimao, and that's something to be attentive to.
谢谢。那还有一个书中也是提到的，应该是 Chapter 5 I think，重要的事情是冲绳里面的关于加害与受害的多层性。那在书中提到了，在二战中在冲绳受害的朝鲜人们，他们作为军夫以及慰安妇。
那个后面我们时间关系可能要稍微缩短一下。
好的。
So the next point I want to make is in relation to Chapter 5, which is about the suffered, people who have suffered in this process, and particularly Okinawans and the comfort woman. I'm sorry, the Koreans in Okinawa and the comfort woman.
那另外一点在提到的是关于作为内地人的冲绳人以及外地人的朝鲜台湾人之间的权利差异。
And from there, we also need to kind of think about this relationally. For example, Okinawans in facing Taiwan and Korea will be understood as Japanese.
Okay.
And such differentiation of identities become very important element of that history.
好，所以在这点有一个问题是想要请问的是，在冲绳之间中的关于阶级或者是加害被害的多层性，以及冲绳本岛对于就是先岛诸岛的那些歧视制度以轻视这样的多层性，也就是说，在冲绳里面的权力关系跟Translocal 之间的关联性是什么？这是我的一个问题。
Okay, and from here is a question that I have for Takahashi-san. That is, how do we understand this, how would I put it? This issue of class or even discrimination that could have existed, say, between Okinawans and Taiwanese, but also within the Okinawan islands, say, between the Amamis and the Okinawan island. And how would that play into your discussion of the translocal?
好，那后面我稍微重点一点的讲，就是还有一个提到是关于可以被文字记录下来的记录，以及关于口唇记忆。也就是说，在书中的76到77页提到，对于西猫来讲，阿妈米作为一种历史的沙漠，存在的非常多拒绝被文书记录的信号，这点是重要的。而这个东西连接上了唐宁刚刚干的这2篇文章。
This two other point that I want to make. One is related to the issue of documentation. As you discuss on pages 76 to 76, 78, where the idea of in Shimao, the idea of Amami is as a land where a lot of the messages are to be narrated in languages or in written form. So how do we, take account of that?
那下面关于这2篇的引用，我今天就略过了。日文叫意識の海の物語跟イカジアジャの光線線索。那关于这2篇，可能还请各位自行去找来阅读。那我这边想要讲的事情是，简单来说，在唐宁刚刚干的文本里面，他强调了那个非文字的力量。
So the emphasis again is on the non-literal, non-written messages that has been carried on in the islands, right? And this related to what I said about Tanikawa Gan earlier. Yes.
简单来讲，就是这种非文字的力量跟非国家式的交流是连接在一起的。
And the importance about the non-written or the non-literal is that it actually encountered the force of the national, which is all about written and the literal.
那这种非文字的力量在文中虽然看出来是某一种反大陆式的或是岛的一个理论述，但是我要强调的是，在唐宁刚刚干的书中，其实提到这样子对抗汉字力量的力量。汉字世界的力量在中国内部也强烈的存在，这是重要的一点。
Okay, so I just want to say that this, resistance towards words or the written, also exists within the Chinese context, and even though such a tendency is often understood as a sort of archipelagical or islandic formation.
我还有最后一章而已。那还有一个重要点是。意思是说，如果顺着唐宁刚刚干的说法来说，如何将大陆或是中国的非汉字性与周边民族的非汉字性视为一种循环系统，我想这样的观点是非常重要的。
And I think this also needs to be related to the continent, right? So even though the emphasis on the non-written seems to be out of the context of the islands, the continental aspect of it is also important to consider or in relation to that.
OK， 这是我最后一章，所以简单来讲，我们不断的讲台湾有事、台湾有几之类的。那也许我们要问的事情，首先，也许大家会有一个共识是 Okinawa 有几、台湾有几要真的压力，就是它是一直存在的一件事情。那么要问的事情，如何拒绝成为战场
？So this comes to my conclusion and last point, which is to bring this more philosophical theoretical discussion to the geopolitical. In a case of the current discourse where in Japan, they understand, there's a discourse by the Japanese Prime Minister saying that if there's something to happen in Taiwan, it would also happen in Japan. So how do we avoid these spaces to become the site of war?
那如果顺着他们刚刚的话来讲呢，也就是说，我们如何思考在大陆内部的内辖，以及在内辖中的大陆性。
So if I can use the Tanikawa Gun's kind of language, the question for me then would become how do we think about the nasia, which is a kind of archipelagical articulation within the continent and within the islands. And both I think are important to put in conversation.
那我参加的大家也知道的一个帐篷剧团的导演叫做桜井大佐さん，他常常提到 Tokyo Nesha 这个概念，他在我们的戏里面不断的出现。那我想要顺着这个话来讲，什么 Nesha， 哪里 Nesha 这样的一个地理概念，如何延伸成为在社会里面多层或是多维的概念，我想是从Japonesha 概念延伸出来的一个重要的事。
Yeah, so this comment is about how do we extend, by using the suffix "nesha", how do we extend and thinking about a place beyond the place itself? And I think this is something I may want to push forward a little bit.
那最后回到本书在第7页提到的下面这一段，我想用我的话来整理的说，就会是边缘跟少数如何作为中心的主体的赋权，拒绝被地方政治家长式化的边缘化与少数化的话语。这一段的英文就在下面。那So you guys can read that one.
So this is the final comment, which is actually from Takahashi-san's book, page number 7. How do we counter the paternalistic discourse and the political economy that marginalizes or minoritizes local politics? And I think this will be the key for thinking about this book and beyond.
最后一点点事情是，不好意思，我今天用了思想跟理念的巨量的文本来讨论这件事情。不过在Arasaki上跟阿拉高瓦上在那个伊萨克亚多克利兹论所的这样的居酒屋独立论争里面，其实有谈到关于思想理念以及现实运动之间路线的差异。也就是说，阿拉萨基想强调的事情是在现实里面如何进行运动。那关于这个东西，也许是我们接下来也许可以讨论的一个点。以上，谢谢。
Okay, so just to conclude, I think there's a differentiation between different lines between theory, thought, and movement. And how do we kind of perceive from such differentiations or differences would be something we can actually take from this book to go forward. So thank you very much. So I hope the translation was helpful. And sorry for taking extra time on that. We are now ready to open the discussion to the floor. But before that, may I allow invite Shin to offer a few comments on the commentaries that you heard. Maybe just 5 minutes, and then we'll leave 15 minutes for a conversation. Thank you. And if you have any questions, you can leave in the chat box or just raise your hand or speak up later.
Thank you. Thank you, La-san and Chio Sensei and Andy for your such a heavy labor. I know exactly how it feels like to do a translation, especially this kind of simultaneous or like consecutive translation. So, and so just quickly, and I don't think I can answer the questions. It's just too like broad and deep, and definitely, but like definitely those questions and comments are essential, like for me as well, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to be here. Like to kind of to enrich and to deepen, like this sort of the discussion that I put in this book, because again, the whole like knowledge construction in the process, like should be, and in like in reality, it is kind of collaborative effort, right? So, so in that sense, I first like to thank you two, these two commentators, and as I said, like it just kind of really can't like answer those questions, but like just quickly, question. I mean, the first question from a Professor Wakabayashi about the concept of home is, I think it's quite significant. Like just in a sense that it is like the home itself as a concept is really can be interpreted as a kind of conservative direction, right? But at the same time, it is a concept for us to be reflective of the place and the so-called culture built upon the place, the context of the place, and lives of the people. And when I wrote the last chapter, which is basically about my sort of, like kind of ethnography or documentation of the journey that I went to, with my friends from Darwin in Australia and also from Okinawa. Just to kind of, like kind of clarify or trying to like raise this issue of when, trying to kind of dig up, like sort of qualitatively, the kind of, like the very early moment of people feel that, oh, this space, though these people never been to, have something similar or something shareable, like in common, with my own experience, right? This kind of the feeling, right? And when I wrote this chapter, my key references, like back of my head, though I didn't include it, is the last chapter of Gaston Hodge's book called Alter Politics, which with my friends I translated and I published 2 years ago. And the last chapter, he was talking about the notion of dwelling, right? By, remembering his visit to his grandparents' house and looking at these 3 trees planted at the backyard of his grandparents' house, I think. And he's trying to kind of, like imagine or like trying to be reflective of his own being as someone migrant coming to Australia and resided in a particular place, right? And what is this? Like his probably what am I? Like it's a kind of, I think, the challenge that he imposed upon himself. And as far as I remember, he didn't give us like a clear answer. Of course, this is not. It's really existential question. But anyway, so that was a kind of inspiration, like the back of my head when I was writing that last chapter of the book. So here, what we can draw, what I'd like to draw from this episode is that the home is, like the place of the security, for example, or place of comfortability, and place of conservation, for example. Yeah. So, like, depends on the context and situation we're around. It can be interpreted in a kind of conservative way, but at the same time, it's like I said at the beginning of this, like in my response, like it just can be, coming back to this point, profoundly reflective, yeah, of the nature of this society or of the self, in a, like a critical way. So, yeah, looking at the grassroots movement, that kind of related to the second question you raised, Professor Wakabayashi. Like, how can we now think of a, in such a difficult time that we are deeply embedded, right? And such a, like, kind of society that we often hear and sort of accommodating, right? Or being accommodated by a, like kind of, like the sense of reality based on geopolitics, the security, whatever, that sort of thing. It is like really, hard now, like for various reasons, like to think about like what's the kind of the key elements to consolidate or to create a kind of relationality or relevance to different sorts of places have, similar kind of a different kind of problem. But here, what I would like to is kind of raise is this and kind of related to your comment, Dasan, like about sort of the fluidity, is that how can we articulate, like this notion of articulate is specifically, like as I try to kind of draw a direct line to what Stuart Hall said. Kind of connecting or like interweaving, like seemingly different things, but happen at the same time as conjunctural moment, right? So I think it's like the kind of easy, like another way to put it, how to interweave, right? Different elements, yeah? So this articulation of Stuart Hall is not the same as like the dictionary sense, like if you look at it, right? It's a highly theoretical and, like, to just like, to say the things that I just kind of mentioned. So I gave some, some of the examples, like about my friends, like here and there. And a book introduced like the couple, like individual lives and the collective lives, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm sorry, but like to like sort of give you back the question, and I think it is kind of irresponsible way, but because I don't have an answer, like I said at the beginning, like I would like to kind of think collectively, how do we like, now think these kind of different, the suffering or the form of oppression or like form of resistance in the different places, how do we interweave, this kind of thing, right? And so coming back to the first question of Chio Sensei, right? It is probably the time, for me at least, like the next question, the project is to sort of try to articulate this really, this idea of place as a, like away from the real, like this rigidity or like a fixity, and then I think that this fluidity is kind of as a pretext, like the precondition. So I'm sorry, yeah, but like this is like my response.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you, Shin. It's a very daunting task actually to respond to two long commentaries in such a short time. But in any case, let's do collect a couple comments or questions from the floor. We have about another 10, 11 minutes or so. So any thoughts, comments, or questions you have, or way of responding to both commentaries. Megan, please. Please just open your microphone and speak. It's Megan Morris from University of Sydney in Australia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Excellent. Look, that was just wonderful, the whole 2 hours. Thank you very much to all three speakers. And because there is very little time left, I just want to directly ask Shin something about AUKUS, because I think there's a difference in the emergence of the AUKUS phenomenon from the traditional Cold War experience. And it's different because in large part of the experience of Australians, it doesn't actually exist yet. Your activist in Wollongong is very important because it may exist, but it is important to understand Australia has not bought any nuclear submarines and indeed may never have any. We had a plan with France and the former Prime Minister of Australia suddenly, in the dark, overthrew that and made this AUKUS agreement. But there are significant American politicians who do not want to provide Australia with any nuclear submarines this side of 40 years. Now, why that could matter is that it matters to us because essentially we won't have any defence system of that sort. But if there were to be a large conflict, that allows the United States to just swoop in the name of defending Australia, take over completely. So it's important to, I think, not say the new Cold War as though it's the same. I think the dimension of fantasy, of media narrative, of hype, and of sheer vagueness in the reportage of the geopolitical is making it very hard to connect some of the dots. And so we go back to an old model, the Cold War. Now, I'm not saying that the Cold War is over, but I am saying that a Cold War in which geopolitical fantasies are produced, is slightly different. As it is different, in Okinawa, people are living very close to the bases. The photo you showed of Darwin completely shocked me. I had no idea because there's 3,000 miles between where I live and Darwin. So in that space of fantasy and vagueness, I actually think we have a space for a kind of activism which is different from traditional activism. So I'll just put that to you. Could you hear me?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Megan. It was very cogent question and commentary to bring the real politics into the mix. I think Guangxin has a hand. Okay, so let's go to Guangxin. Yes.
Andy, I'll translate for myself. You can take a break. I'll keep everything short. Okay? Okay, so historically, don't forget it, right? It's called Ryukyu. Right? So I don't know. This is partly educational, not necessarily addressing to you, right? I mean, it's probably extra, right? And the by now, what is the status of Okinawa? Is it a colony or what? It's a very controversial issue, right? Yakabi says the same thing. Second song, first song, and so on, right? Okinawa was the first song, Taiwan, second, Korean, third, right? And a lot of walk out, except Okinawa. I know that, Okinawa independence movement, and people like, a lot of people say it's just not viable, right? Economically and so on. But historically, it was independent kingdom. So what is the current situation? And second, I think this part I don't need to translate. Everyone understand. The second, our Thai friend, Sulichai, suggested there need to be island, alliance, part of the world. Island is always the center, including Australia, New Zealand. Australia is a continent, but also an island, right? Given the size of the population and so on and so forth. And I know that Jeju Island, all that alliance already involved. And controversial issue like Diaoyutai, Seneca Island, controversy, right? And all of that. And so I want to educationally saying this, Okinawan have a big mind in the sense that several quick example, okay? The memorial park includes all the people died, right? And you ask them, who are the people, on the list, right? Including all the attack, like American soldiers and so on. This part I don't think need any translation, right? So I don't want to keep on telling you, this big man issue. And let me wind up. This is about very, very money issue. I don't think it's called, drinking parlor. Paosen, Aomori. Okay? This part also you don't need translation. And refusing battle is a big issue. Taiwanese is the worst. They go to Okinawa and thank them to say, we have your protection, but never understand that once there's a war, Okinawa is the first one to be destroyed. right? So I think it's Taiwanese problem. And we need to do something about it. But nobody cares about it. I think keep saying it's only 30 minutes away, right? And so on. So including the Diaoyutai Protect, group, which has a memorial, in the morning just now. So in conclusion, I think Okinawa issue is a global issue, not a regional issue. So the islands and all the American, I don't need to tell you, American has what, more than 600 bases in across the world, right? Taiwan used to be because of China and so on. So how do we put forward the alliance? We tried a little bit, but so far, nothing has been there except, Jeju and so on. I don't think there's any translation, correct? All right. So this is the big issue, and we only will discuss it for next ISES conference in Thailand. We need to put forward a research proposal for long-term collaboration, at least, but not only for academics, but others. Thank you.
Thank you, Guanshin. Great to see you back alive and calling for attention to the conference next year, but also a wide range of activist research agenda. We don't really have more time, but I'll let Shin to have the final word in response to some of these comments and questions. Maybe just 1 or 2 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, less than 1 minute. So, first of all, like thank you, beyond the matter of formality, deeply, as a small token of appreciation, I'd like to show our reciprocal like kind of relation between you here, online, physically here, and us, myself. That's the first word. And the second word is that Guanshin's old friend, Sungu, when she attended this, like to give a lecture and received a comment, I remember she always said, that I received a huge question, out of this conference. Yeah, that's the kind of ending remark. So I just kind of want to repeat, like the kind tribute to, these people, really, and yourself here, by saying that today I received huge questions, that set sometime, in the future, the course in my project, like in the future. And it's not just, it's not a research project. It's just it is like more profound, right? So, this is kind of, I just like wrap up. Thank you.
I just want to say that it's not easy to have a conversation about Okinawa, even though it's so close to us in Taiwan. But it's also so important, as everybody has taken note of. And precisely, I think it's difficult because we're translating between different discourses and languages. There are philosophical discourses about Okinawa as well as geopolitical discourse on Okinawa. And I think this is what we are trying to bridge in this room. So I want to thank you all for your participation and your patience with my terrible translation. But I hope it does help the our conversation going. And before ending, I just want to thank again Shin for coming all the way, Wakabayashi-san also from coming all the way to Taiwan, and Haomin for this really extended engagement. And everyone who are in the room, online and in person. Thank you all very much. I hope I'll be seeing you again online or in person before long. So thank you and have a good day.